The civil rights movement is often regarded as one of the most important eras in American history. The movement produced some of the most popular American figures, as well as some of the biggest legislation passed. Today, we will focus on how the movement affected the government. What was the civil rights movement about? The civil rights movement aimed for complete equality. After the end of the Civil War, former male slaves were granted freedom and given equal rights that white men had, granted by the 13th and 14th Amendments. But all of that changed after the Supreme Court's ruling on the case Plessy v. Ferguson. In 1982, when Homer Plessy, a mixed-race man, boarded a whites-only train car in New Orleans. By boarding the whites-only car, he violated the Car Act of 1890, which required equal but separate railroad accommodations for white and non-white passengers. Plessy was charged under the act, and at his trial, his lawyers argued that Judge Howard Ferguson should dismiss the charges on the grounds that the act was unconstitutional. Ferguson denied the request, and the Louisiana Supreme Court upheld Ferguson's ruling on the appeal. The case later went to the actual Supreme Court, and Ferguson was ruled in favor of in 1896. This ruling made segregation legal as long as the facilities that they were given were also equal. So how did the civil rights movement become popular? From 1910 to 1970, many blacks moved from the South in favor for northern and midwestern cities like Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, New York, and Philadelphia. The heavy concentration of black people in these urban areas, contrasted with the former status quo of blacks being spread out in the South, led to a common sense of community and the collection of similar belief within the black community, and helped lead to more leadership and cooperation. The migration of blacks into urban areas also led to increased exposure to more liberal ideas. Cities are usually very liberal, so blacks moving to these areas exposed them to more liberal ideas overall. In World War II, many blacks fought in the war, and they went to Europe to fight. The countries they defended treated them well and praised them as heroes. Once those same black people came back to their own home country, after not only risking their lives for it, but for the country to have the same beliefs as the Nazis, the people they had just fought against, and still being treated badly, made black people feel undermined and frustrated. This led to the idea of equality within the black community much more prevalent. What did the civil rights movement do for equality? During segregation, schools were made specifically for civil rights lawyers in order to end inequality through the courts. The NAACP was made for this very purpose. It was founded in 1909, and it helped lead to the overturning of Plessy v. Ferguson. Sit-ins and boycotts were also done. Sit-ins is when a group of people would sit in a whites-only area and not move. And boycotts are when blacks would not give money to certain areas like buses because they were discriminating against black people. Who were some famous civil rights activists? Martin Luther King, a Southern Baptist from Georgia, was one of the most prominent civil rights leaders ever. He graduated high school early and went to college for ministry and philosophy. He promoted Christianity and nonviolence, but he was also for breaking the rules he saw as morally incorrect with the Bible, and expressed his displeasure with white moderates who supported the movement but did nothing to stand up for blacks. He was killed in 1968 outside of his hotel. Some speculated the FBI has something to do with his death. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little, was born in Nebraska. When he was a kid, he moved to the Midwest, but his father would take his own life, and his mom would be forced into a mental institution. Malcolm would drop out of middle school after being in many foster homes. He would then move to Boston and become a criminal, and would be sent to prison for a robbery he did. In prison, he converted to Islam and joined the Nation of Islam. Malcolm preached self-defense and black autonomy. He's often seen as much more radical as MLK, and was killed in 1964. Many speculate that his own organization, the Nation of Islam, was responsible for his death. Fred Hampton, a kid born in Chicago, was gifted athletically and academically as a child. In high school, he led walkouts and protests against his school's decision for not allowing black students to attend the prom, and for the school not hiring black teachers. He later became the chairman for the Black Panther Party, an organization that protected black people from the police and helped poor black communities by giving them food and water. He also helped start the Rainbow Coalition with a Puerto Rican group and a white Irish group that preached things like socialism and social justice. He preached socialism, equality, and cooperation among the races. He was eventually killed in an FBI raid. What laws helped the civil rights movement? Many laws were passed in order to perpetuate equality in America. In 1948, President Truman desegregated the military. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that Brown versus the Board of Education proved that segregated schools were unconstitutional. 3 years later, Eisenhower would sign the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Finally, in 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson passed the last Civil Rights Act, ending segregation for good. 1 year later, the Voting Rights Act would pass, lessening restrictions on Black Americans on voting. In 1967, Nixon would create something called the Philadelphia Plan, which required all businesses in Philadelphia to have a certain amount of Black people working in it. So overall, how did the Civil Rights Movement change the government? The Civil Rights Movement led to the desegregation of all sectors and aspects of life, increased federal regulation, and increased more economically left-wing policies. It lessened restrictions on Black people in economics and schools. It made representation more accurate in Congress for Black people, and the government put a greater sense of awareness and urgency on solving inequality and promoting justice and diversity for the nation.